So then you would say prior to the creation that God didn't know if this was going to be a successful endeavor, right? Like he didn't know if he could accomplish any of his given plans prior to creating mankind because he didn't
he seems to have expected it, but when he regrets his own decision, he seems to be blaming himself. I know in your opening you said, it would result in God blaming himself. I think he is putting some blame on himself for the state of affairs and how bad mankind has gotten.
But like what you said before, if God isn't making this or didn't intend or didn't have a specific plan to make mankind in this way, I think there's a ton of issue with saying that God regretted his action. Because if you're saying it's not this, like what we were saying in those first 10 minutes, if this isn't something that God specifically planned for, why is God to blame for it? And why would he blame himself for it?
Because you could blame yourself for all sorts of things that is through your own maybe negligence, we'll say. If I hand my kid a loaded gun...
yeah, I'll let you finish it. Go for it.
Yeah, so if this was, let's say this is a case of divine negligence, open theism would be true, right?
Is that what you're saying it is?
He's blaming himself, and so he's taking responsibility for his actions, and yes. And so sometimes you will see God blaming himself or other people blaming God for ills in this world. And
do you think there's ever, if I could interject, do you think there's ever an example of a person legitimately blaming God for anything in the Bible?
Yeah, like Jeremiah.
Which example?
Job got really tortured. He didn't deserve it. That's the whole point of Job, is that Job was innocent of all these things, and the divine bet going on was whether or not he would remain righteous for nothing. He's described as perfect in the text. And this is not about him or about his character, and he's just getting thrown around and tossed around and pummeled. That doesn't seem very nice. That seems a little unjust.
What are the implications of God's character in your view based on what you're describing? Because that's what my next question would be. Like, what are you concluding about God and his character through the examples that you're naming? If you're saying that these actions that mankind is blaming God for, they're like these legitimate claims against God.
Right. I don't think sin is a metaphysical substance or reality. And so sin is in the Hebrew Bible. There's a paper that talks about the concept of Hebrew sin in the Bible, and it's whatever puts you in wrong with another person. And so even if it's something very petty, let's say I'd write a contract for land and or something like that, and I just violate my side of the contract, even if there's no morality involved, I'm putting myself in wrong with someone else, right? And so we do see times within the Bible which God has put in a state of wrongness in relation to other people. And so it's a subjective evaluation. The people certainly think they're getting violated at that point in time. Whether you or I consider that a violation, that's our own prerogative. But I don't think sin is a metaphysics, like a yes-no switch where you could just say, oh yeah, that's God sinning. But you can say, hey, these people who loved God, who served God, they're in the Bible, they write the Bible, they think they're being wronged by God.
I guess what I'm asking
it's a possibility
in your opinion then, because I get what you're saying, in your opinion, do you look at any of these claims that people are making against God and you're saying God did something in this situation that should not have been done? Is that what you're claiming?
Well, yeah, I don't think God should have killed King David's baby for his adultery. I just don't. I don't think he should have done that. And you find within the Bible, I posted a lecture by Christine Hayes, who I mentioned already, about divine law in the Bible. And Jewish and Talmudic texts reinforce this idea that you can reason with God, you could talk to God about standards of righteousness, and sometimes he listens to his people and adjusts what he does based on their input. I think Genesis 18 is a pretty good case of God changing his standards of righteousness based on input from outside himself. And so I think those are...
I'll stop you right there real quick.
Yeah, I don't want to kill all your time.
Oh, no, you're doing fine. It's fine. I'm trying to think of my next question. With that point, what are your implications personally with God's nature if you believe that God did things that he shouldn't have done? Like, how do you view, under this particular open theist perspective of God's nature and character, if you're looking at certain things that he's doing and you're saying, well, these are not things that should have been done. Like, are there implications that you have toward your view of God and that open theism would have toward God due to these like implications that you're bringing forth?
Right. We see in the Psalms a very practical response. The Bible is all about practicality and not metaphysics. And so King David, when he thinks he's being wronged or abandoned by God, he cries out in prayer. And often God listens to this prayer. The prayer is meant to affect God and to change God's mind, change God's disposition. Often you'll see, oh, you've hidden your face from me. You're letting my enemies prosper. And the prayer is meant to affect God on a personal level and to right the wrongs. Sometimes within the Psalms, God is being described as almost shirking his duties. And prayer is the proper response to get God, because he does have some sort of obligation to rule the world in a righteous manner, to come down against the evil people of this world, the Hillary Clintons and
I'll ask a quick question based on that. So if you see any given violation, I'm using like violation loosely, but like from what you're saying, like if you're saying God did a certain thing that you don't believe should have been done, how does that play into if he is ruling the universe in a way where he is upholding a standard of righteousness? Like, how could someone conclude that God is perfectly upholding a standard of righteousness if there were certain things done that you would say shouldn't have been done? Like, what kind of standard do you give?
Yeah, I think that's part of the conclusion of Job, is that there is not a universally upheld standard of righteousness. And so calling God to action is the practical and proper response. I pray all the time that God bring his kingdom, you know.
So let's go to your conclusion of Job then. What would you say in, like, if put yourself in the position of Job? I know it's your favorite book. At the end, after God says everything he says to Job and Job withdraws his legal case, what would you say? And this is a, subjective question, but I want to hear it. What would you say Job is thinking of God at that moment, at the very end of the book of Job? Like, what would his thoughts be?
He's feeling defeated. David Kleins has an essay on the conclusion of Job, and basically he's a Hebrew scholar, and so he does the biblical word commentary also, in which he translates the whole book and goes through all the different Hebrew verses and phrases. His conclusion is that Job understands that his legal case cannot proceed because might makes right, and he has to just withdraw it. And he just has to accept reality as it is, and that he's not going to get the justice that he was seeking.
In that case, wouldn't there be wouldn't it be really difficult to have a relationship with God if you're viewing it like he's doing something that's incorrect? Like if you're saying that it was wrong for him to kill David's son, wouldn't you say that there are extreme and dangerous implications to having a relationship with God, because now you're not believing that he may always do right in a situation, and there isn't that full trust and that full perfection of your, like, the belief in his perfect nature? I would say, like, isn't there kind of like an issue there?
Yeah, some atheists do argue like that, and so that's a subjective evaluation. I think that the Bible is true, and how the Bible describes God is accurate, and the character of God, as I see in the Bible, despite those few misgivings, God is good, God is just, God is righteous, God is someone whose character I like. He has shown to be reliable in the past, and so I put my trust in him. Our trust is not based in metaphysical inability to change or anything like that. That's not why you trust your wife or you trust your girlfriend or anything like that. You trust people based on their character, who they are, their personality, and how you relate to them, your relationship.
Because of the fact of how you believe about how God can change, wouldn't you say that there are certain ways in which God can change and they're not predictable by human beings, and that there would be nothing that you could do about it if God started doing more things that you may not agree with? And doesn't that like scare you? Isn't that like a scary thing?
Yes. Well, no, I'm not scared about anything like that. God's pretty reliable, but he does have a wide tool belt. And so in Walter Brueggemann's Theology of the Old Testament, he talks about God encounters the same situation multiple times, and he tries dealing with it in various ways to try to try to make it come about, try to make his results that he wants materialize. And it often doesn't happen. There's one verse that says, I punished the children of Israel in vain. He punished them without purpose because what he was trying to do was affect repentance. And the entire story of the Bible, Israel means struggles with God. It's about man struggling with God. God's trying what he can do to reach us, to have a relationship with us. But the people, they just reject God. And he laments over this.
Couldn't you see this the other way around, though? Like, if God has the ability to do something that objectively wouldn't be correct in a certain situation, wouldn't it be technically possible under that type of worldview for a person to be able to correct God, whether it be through prayer or a petition, and they could tell God, hey, you're not doing something correct, and God would have to change if he realizes that the person was more correct than him? Because I think that would have a very dangerous implication.
The Talmudic texts describe that quite a few times. And so there's a book about that called Pious Irreverence, in which people affect God on that level. So the biblical examples, again, are Abraham confronting God about the righteousness of collateral damage in Sodom and Gomorrah, and then God adopting stricter standards of righteousness. So I think we can affect God. I think that's a biblical concept the biblical authors believed in. And I don't see this...
Quickly, because there's just one more minute. Otherwise, I'd let you go on.
I would love to talk. You should come on my podcast. We could just talk.
Maybe I will. Okay, so with the last minute, so when I don't know what to say right now. When it comes to the specific type of example that I was trying to name earlier, like a person could, in theory, pray, and they would say, hey, God, like, I don't really think you're doing something right here. You would view that as God could technically have been doing something wrong, and then a person could correct him. Like, is that what you believe was going on in Genesis 18? Like, that God was like literally just destroying everything, and Abraham changed his mind?
I think collateral damage is acceptable. I just think that Abraham wanted a lower standard, or a higher standard, and lower collateral damage, and God was willing to accept that. So I wouldn't say God's original intention, if he wanted to just level Sodom, good and wicked, I think that would have been morally fine and just. But because he has this input with people are able to tell him their ideas, and he accepts this input from outside himself. We find divine counsel scenes within the Bible, which God says, hey, how should I do this? And then people approach him and they offer different things. Even Job, that we're talking about, has this divine counsel scene where it's like the adversary shows up. It's like, hey, look at this guy. I bet he won't worship you. And God says, okay, we'll test this out and see if that's the case or not. And people are offering things to God that he considers and then acts upon.